There's a whakatauke, which is one of my favourites, and it's very, very well known. And it goes, he aha te mea nui, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. And what is the most important thing? It is people, it is people, it is people. And a reoccurring theme that we've had so far, yesterday, and it's come through quite strongly this morning, is that the reason you do what you do is to have healthy plants and healthy animals produce good food, which is full of nutrition, that then is good for people. So, on that note, I'd like to introduce Dr. Alistair Humphrey. Dr. Humphrey is the Medical Officer Health here in Canterbury, and as such, he investigates a very wide range of health issues. One of these is the correlation between high rates of nitrates found in the water supply and the incidence of bowel cancer. With colon cancer being the second most common cause of cancer deaths in New Zealand, Dr. Humphrey has highlighted the need for New Zealand to study and understand the health risks of high levels of nitrates from commercial dairy farming seeping into our drinking water.
Okay, thanks for that introduction. I'm really going to tell you a few stories about nitrates, drinking water, and the various issues that we've had with health. So it's a little bit different to what you've heard so far. And forgive me if I present data that other people may have presented, but I will be talking a little bit about the effect of nitrates on my job and on our community. I am going to talk about colorectal cancer, but I'm also going to talk about blue babies. This is a Smyth here. This is a tin of milk powder with 2 cows. Look, there's 2 in Canterbury. Did you know that? And this, of course, is what we're trying to sell to the Chinese. See, I didn't want a picture of colorectal cancer for you, so we do call it CRC, so I have a picture of CRC. Anyway, I'll start off. Initially, we got involved in this in public health because of the risk of blue baby syndrome, and it's complicated. Methemoglobinemia or blue baby syndrome is complicated, just as colorectal cancer is complicated. There's not a simple causal relationship. Nitrates in our water, in a small baby, this is a baby under 6 months, probably under 4 months, gets converted to nitrites in the gut. So you will hear people say, well, you will hear people say that there are other things that cause blue baby syndrome, and indeed they do. You can have and sometimes require gastro-infection in a baby for it to develop blue baby syndrome. But in the gut, the nitrates are reduced to nitrites, the hemoglobin is oxidized to methemoglobin in the bloodstream, and which in a normal adult, when this happens to us, and it does happen all the time, we have this enzyme here, which actually converts it back to normal hemoglobin. So for adults, we do get, occasionally we do get methemoglobin, but it's rapidly converted back to normal hemoglobin. So we don't turn blue, but babies don't have this enzyme. So if they're exposed to nitrates in their water, that's what will cause a baby to effectively not be able to transfer oxygen with its hemoglobin in the same way that we can. So it's similar actually to carbon monoxide poisoning. Your hemoglobin gets bound up. And in the same way with carbon monoxide poisoning, the blood actually does change colour. So in carbon monoxide it goes cherry red, but in methemoglobinemia it goes a kind of chocolate brown. You can actually tell a methemoglobin baby just from looking at its blood. So it does very rarely happen to adults. There are some rare syndromes where it can happen to adults. So we do know that they can report things in adults, headaches, that kind of thing that a baby wouldn't be able to report. But this is what happens as the hemoglobin goes up, the baby changes colour, eventually goes blue. Headache, of course, reported by adults, not by babies at that age. Lightheadedness, shortness of breath, and then eventually cardiac arrhythmias, and then above 70% the baby will die. It's extremely rare, it's never, as far as we know, the last case in New Zealand was in about 1994, but it does happen in the US quite frequently. And by frequently, I mean they probably have at least half a dozen cases a year, and they're nearly always associated with drinking water. Now, why are you giving a baby drinking water? Well, if you're using formula feed and you use the water that you normally drink and it's got nitrates in it, then that's what causes a problem for the baby. So breastfeeding, nitrates is not passed on through breast milk. So a breastfed baby will never get methemoglobinemia. So we have worked very closely with our local midwives in Canterbury, partly because midwives love promoting breastfeeding, but also because particularly our rural community, who may well have their own shallow bore water, women of childbearing age in those communities are vulnerable, and their babies are vulnerable to methemoglobinemia. So what we now do in Canterbury is every pregnant woman gets to check whether or not she's in one of the zones where nitrates could be high, and then they should get their water tested. And actually, it's a message that's actually gone beyond just pregnant women now. A lot of the local councils are trying to encourage absolutely everybody now to test for nitrates, and also, of course, E. coli in their water. And the leaflets provided for the mum. This is for doctors. Actually, they can look up. Doctors and midwives can look up whether or not a woman is living in the zone where they're at risk, and then they're given this leaflet. And we have a system in primary care and in the hospital called Health Pathways, which basically explains how doctors and midwives can, when they get a set of symptoms or when they have to screen somebody, what they need to do. And of course here, this one tells them about nitrate testing and encourages people to get their water tested. So if it turns out that they have high levels of nitrate, they must not, they should breastfeed the baby if possible, but if they have to use bottled water, if they have to use water, they should only use bottled water. And this is now happening all over Canterbury. We didn't need to used to do this. And I think it's working. We do occasionally hear of mums whose babies have been in contact with nitrate in the water. No severe cases of blue baby syndrome, but certainly anecdotal reports from mothers that when they switch to bottled water, their children's health improves. So we've had to do this in Canterbury because of the increasing levels of nitrate in our water. And there was a professor who came and spoke to the Havelock inquiry, Professor Steve Prudy. He said something about, oh, well, surely nitrates can't be a problem on the what he called the prairie. And he came from Alberta. This is Alberta. This is Canterbury. I don't think he looked out of his window actually, because he would have seen there's a lot more cows. These numbers have gone up actually. We're above 1.3 million now in Canterbury. And so we've got pretty much, look at the size of Alberta, 600,000 square kilometres, we're 45,000, and we've got, they do have, admittedly they have a lot of beef cattle, but we've got as many cattle overall as they have in a very small area. And for many years now, the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment has been alerting us to this issue. The biggest source of nitrogen in New Zealand waterways is urine from farm animals. And it's not just our waterways, it's also getting into our aquifers. Why? Jan Wright said more cows per hectare and more conversions, more hectares for cows. So intensification, expansion is the problem. And in terms of nitrogen balance, we're the worst in the world in terms of OECD countries. So we're getting we're more and more nitrogen. As an aside, interestingly, part of my role was air quality. And if I lived in Singapore, the fires a couple of years ago, actually, these aren't Australian fires, these are fires deliberately started in Indonesia to make room for palm kernel, for palm trees to grow palm kernel. This was the air quality in Singapore because of that. is also destroying the environment. So there are orphanages for orangutans who have nowhere to live anymore because of this stuff, which is also fed to these animals here. So we've got irrigation driving intensification, we've got our nitrogen consumption going up, and we're also still using quite a lot of palm kernel, which is destroying the lungs of our planet. And it's really not much benefit to a lot of farmers, at least according to this expert, who said, you know, the palm kernel itself is driving up the cost, reducing eating into profit anyway, and also we have a lot more nitrate as well because of the intensified farming. Canterbury leads the way in dairy expansion, and the original report from the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment was that there was going to be an increase. She had hoped there was going to be more forested land. That hasn't happened, and that's not very good news for water quality. So the levels of nitrates, there being not the increase in forested land that we had expected, has gone up even more. And the problem for most, even good farmers, and they work very hard to kind of reduce their runoff, but those applying standard mitigation techniques are not succeeding. They're producing more milk, but they're producing a lot more nitrogen as well, and that's running into our groundwater. So a more recent report from Landcare Research talks about how much nitrate leaching we've got around our country. You can see we don't do very well down here in Canterbury. There are other parts of the country where it's high, but it's 10 million kilograms increase has gone up in the last 20 or 30 years or so. And we're nearly 200 million. Probably now, we've probably exceeded this now. And 250% increase in nitrogen fertilizer. So here, this shows the type of animal, and this is dairy, and this is basically why there's so much increase in nitrate leaching. And this shows the regions, and we don't do very well in Canterbury here. This kind of pale blue line is Canterbury. So, but the overall increase is seen both at local and national level. And these are some data from our local region. This is from Hines, showing groundwater concentrations of nitrate, and this is the maximum allowable value, and it's bumped up above that value in many cases. And they've had to mitigate in Hines with the Managed Aquifer Recharge Programme, where they are pumping river water into our groundwater to dilute the nitrates. So the solution to pollution is dilution in Hines. Similar things going along closer to here. Selwyn White Row, we can see that nitrates in certain boards are climbing. And this has been done by local. I was quite pleased to see that I think it's Helen got her daughter, Catherine Tahalba, from Rangamuru Girls' School. So they published in the Journal of Hydrology. This is informing us about what's going on, and we're going to use some of these data when we look into colorectal cancer that I'll come to in a minute. So not only is it going up overall, and in shallow bores we definitely know that. The problem there is for many of our farming community use shallow bores for their own drinking water, but it's also getting deeper. And the conclusion from that previous paper by the Rutters was that it's not just shallow bores that are at risk. Inevitably, the nitrates is getting deeper and deeper and going into our aquifers. So it threatens not just private bores, but in due course we're likely to see increases in our community supplies. So right now, if you're on a community supply, say in Christchurch or in Ashburton, your water is relatively safe. It's not high in nitrates at all, but that is likely going to change. And you can see that there are some deep bores in some of these places that actually have relatively high rates of nitrate, 150 metres, and in Selwyn, and it's contaminated already and getting worse. I'll tell a little story about nitrates. This was an interesting situation that arose for some of our staff when they went to a meeting in Hines, and one of the farmers down there put his hand up and he said, "Hey, why are you so worried about this MAV? We've been been told that it's 11.3, he said that the World Health Organization said you could relax that, you could probably double it, and we were very surprised. This math was set back in the 50s, and it used real people, it used real deaths. Normally you have this no observable effect level, which is applied. So you test on animals, and then you then have a safety limit applied to humans. But actually back in the 50s and 60s, when there were a lot of babies dying of blue baby syndrome in the States, they actually basically drew the level where above which there were deaths, below which there were no deaths. And so it was quite a hard level, and I was very surprised here that WHO had suggested somehow that they might relax the level. Then so I went to the literature, and I found that they indeed had. There was a technical advisory group that had referenced this paper, and this is a technical advisory group that advises ministries of health all over the world, and they had said, under certain circumstances, with rigorous clinical monitoring, you can relax the levels. And I said, rigorous clinical monitoring? We can't rigorously clinically monitor our pregnant women, even in Ashburton. How are they going to do that in Bangladesh or Afghanistan? You know, it seemed very strange. But the reference, the single reference, and this is an opinion piece, this is not actually original data. It came from this guy, Alex Avery, who works for the Hudson Institute. I thought, that's quite interesting. The WHO has been influenced by a paper from this guy. Who is he? And who's the Hudson Institute? Well, they are a right-wing think tank funded by Monsanto in Washington. And among their heroes are Dick Cheney, as you see here, Shinzo Abe, Benjamin Netanyahu, Rupert Murdoch, Mike Pence, I think that is. So you can see. This is the kind of thing we're up against. And, you know, good on the farmer for reading up on this stuff. But these people are funded, Monsanto directly funds the Hudson Institute. And of course, the fertilizer industry is worth about $177 billion a year, of which Monsanto claim a huge proportion of that. So Alex Avery is probably driving around in a Ferrari right now. They pay him off $1 million to get something insinuated into a WHO publication, which he's succeeded in doing. So I spoke to the writers of that article, Professor John Fowle from the University of Oxford, and I said, did you look up these references? Did you check on these people? Because we've got farmers in, 18,000 miles away who are picking up on stuff that you're writing and giving us problems about it. And it quite clearly is biased and has been funded by Monsanto. And he said he would change it, and he's yet to change it. But I don't know for sure whether he's not getting grants from Monsanto as well. So it's really an example of how difficult it is to deal with. And I encourage our staff to look very, very carefully at the references, and because all the time we're up against very powerful forces who are insinuating information and disinformation even into academic publications, even into the WHO publications, which are very carefully scrutinised. Anyway, so what's happening? This is back in 2011, and this comes from data. This is basically a summary of what's happened from ECAN. And we can see that the blue areas, which were low in nitrates, have disappeared, and the red areas, which are high in nitrates, have got bigger. And there's been recent studies around here, private studies actually of bores, and they're nearly all contaminated. Many of them are above the NAV. So new areas have appeared at Greendale. So by 2015, there were these extra patches, and since then, by 2017, there are more high-risk areas being picked up by ECAN. So if you look at the wells, this comes from the Canterbury Water Management Strategy. There's a net increase in nitrates in all of them. Now, the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, one of its targets is to try and reduce nitrates, but they've not done very well at that, I would suggest. So just this is these talk about the targets, and if we look at how have they been doing? Well, they've done really well on irrigation. Look at that, great progress, because they are supposed to do both sides of it. What have they done for nitrates? Well, they've thought about it, basically. And currently on the regional committee, I think there's a lot of dissatisfaction with the progress. It's been 10 years now, and we've still not seen any improvements. Here, this shows we want to get all groundwater wells below 50% of the NAV, which we've just not achieved. Meanwhile, they've pushed on with irrigation, and they're doing very well in that regard. So, that brings me to a recent paper from Denmark. Now, we used to think, well, it's just blue babies, and it's very rare. So let's look after our rural community, those who are in shallow bores, and that'll be enough. But the Danes looked at an enormous number of people. This is a very big study, 2.7 million adults in this study, and they looked across the whole of Denmark. And they looked at nitrate in the drinking water, and they looked at colorectal cancer risk. Now, colorectal cancer is caused by many different things. It is not just caused by nitrates. It is caused by other nitroso compounds that you can get from things like red meat or smoked meat, which is why the WHO and IARC, which is the International Agency of Research into Cancer, occasionally tells us we can't eat sausages or salamis and things, which I always find very distressing. When they told me I couldn't eat bacon, I got very upset. But apparently we can't, or at least we should minimise it because there's a risk there. But this clearly identified there was a risk. Now, there are dietary influences, but with 2.7 million adults, that smooths it out. And they were able to stratify by socioeconomic status, which was a very good proxy in Denmark for diet. So they were able to say that there was a statistically significant risk of colorectal cancer from nitrates in your drinking water, and that risk began at a relatively low level, lower than half our current NAV. Now, you would think alarm bells will be ringing all over the world. Well, they are, but one swallow doesn't make a summer, and one study is not enough for IARC to change the NAV. So at the moment, I've been in touch with Jörg, and he said even in Denmark they're not changing their NAV, they're leaving it at 11.3 milligrams nitrate nitrogen, but he said they're looking for corroboration of their study from other parts of the world. And Jörg was well aware of our own situation here in New Zealand. So, I mean, here he says, modelling suggests 50% probability that nitrate content, this is from an ECAN report, saying that nitrate, pulling together the data before from the DMARC papers, there's a 50% probability that nitrate is going to go up by 4 milligrams at any location within the main urban area of the city. They're talking about Christchurch here. So if you combine that with what these guys have found, there's a very serious risk, not just to people on shallow bores in the countryside, but to the 400,000 or so people in Christchurch who get their water from the aquifer. Why is it going up? Well, the Waimak doesn't flow directly into the aquifer. The Waimak is a shelved river, so the aquifer runs under the Waimak, and intensification north of the Waimakariri River is leading to increased nitrate levels in the Waimakariri region, and it's flowing underneath. It's coming towards Christchurch, so it is of some concern. What would we have to do about it? What can you do about nitrates? Well, boiling your water makes it worse. It doesn't improve it. It concentrates it. You have to get put in an ion exchange system. And the USA there are states in the west of the US where there are very high levels of nitrates in some cases, and they've had to take it out using very expensive equipment. So it can go up to $229 per person for an ion exchange system, or even more for reverse osmosis. And you can imagine that 400,000 people spending $500 a head per year extra. That's really going to load up our rates. And then you've got to get rid of the byproducts as well. So you've got to remove them somehow. So this is a worrying situation, not just for the council, but for everybody in the region. So, why are we worried about cancer? What is it? Well, look at us. Here we are. We're at the top. We have one of the highest rates of colorectal cancer. Now that's a tragedy for us, but it may also be an opportunity in terms of research. We want to know why this is happening. We have high and increasing rates of nitrates all over the country, and we've got high and increasing rates of colorectal cancer. It doesn't mean they're linked, but we need to investigate that. These data here from the Journal of Surgery show that rates of colorectal cancer are indeed going up. They do seem to be changing in their nature, switching from left to right in the case of men in particular, but they are going up. So it's a serious cancer, and it's very serious in New Zealand, and it's getting worse. So fortunately the government did finally pay some heed, and I know Mike George is going to talk to you this afternoon, and I know that the Minister for the Environment, David Parker, was recently saying how Mike had been a very important influence on getting the government to actually do something about this. So they've pulled together a team. Actually, Jane Richards from Loughborough University is doing all the work, but it's led by Michael Baker, who you will have heard a lot on the radio recently talking about coronavirus. He's an epidemiologist, so he's leading the research. We've got Mike Joy involved, environmental scientists, and Professor Alistair Woodward from Auckland, who is he's an expert epidemiologist. So here are some of them. And importantly, here in the middle, that's Professor Ian Town, who's the Ministry of Health's senior scientific advisor, and he's right behind this project. So New Zealand is now, with Jane's help, looking at rates of colorectal cancer, and is going to compare those to the rates of nitrates across the country. We know it's high, we know it's increasing in both cases, but hopefully we can, if we can draw a link, that will help the WHO review that NAV. But we still need to be very careful about what we're doing to our groundwater. This is one of my favourite pictures of my house. There it is down there. And this is a real photograph. It's not photoshopped. But the population is going up, and it could be very expensive to treat the water for that. As an aside, let's not forget also that it takes 10,000 litres of water to make a single kilo of milk solids, and the poor farmer only gets $7 for that. Got to get up very early in the morning to make that amount of money from 10,000 litres of water, and that comes from the water footprint. So we need to think about our water footprint as well as our carbon footprint. The Havelock Inquiry told us in no uncertain terms we need to protect our source water, and hopefully the new water agency that Mike, I think, will talk about this afternoon will be far more careful about protecting our source water than our regional and our national governments have been to date, because clearly they've not protected it much, and sadly even something like the Canterbury Water Management Strategy has not really succeeded. Some of the levers we can use with our government, this is one of them, the Sustainable Development Goals our government is signed up to, and key to that life on land and life on water and good health and well-being. They're all linked, and our government signed this declaration, and they should be keeping to it. Here it is in Norway, which you saw it here first. Canterbury did that in Norway.
Good morning. You said that pregnant women might be wise to use bottled water. Is that what I understand?
No. If the first thing that happens is the midwife will tell them whether or not they are in a medium or high risk zone. If they're in a medium risk, which is actually most of Canterbury, and they are getting their water from a private bore, they need to. So they've tested. They need to. Probably the first thing is to test their bore. But I would say that if it comes back in any way above half the NAV, I wouldn't be taking any chances. I would be, if they're not able to breastfeed, then they should use bottled water to make up a formula.
So what I was getting at was, do the bottled water companies use ionisers and basically spend this money on expensive? And what are we drinking?
It's a good question, and it's worth checking. And they are held to account to the same quality standards that our own community water supplies are. So they will be providing water of good quality because they have to. But the problem for people, particularly people with shallow bores, is that quite often people don't test them for years. You know, they buy the house, and if it's okay, they sometimes test it when they buy the house, but often they don't test it for years, and it's been changing. It's been going up for a lot of people.
This is not a good ad for drinking tap water.
Well,
In the future.
well, in the future, the thing I hope to emphasise is that community supplies right now are safe.
No, I understand.
But the risk in the future is in order to keep them safe, we'll have to spend millions of dollars a year if we get nitrate in our aquifers, and every indication is that that's what's happening right now.
Would a normal household carbon filter take out the nitrates that
It will not in a wall.
I was wondering, thank you very much for your presentation. I was wondering with that, what you were saying about nitrates, especially in the Ashburton area. I have heard that in Ashburton there had been a lot of miscarriages, and I was wondering whether you could comment on if that is an effect of that, or if it was to do with selenium or something like that. That's kind of what I remember.
I can't say exactly what it would have caused. What I can say is there is a theoretical risk to the unborn child as well as to the born child, if you like. So there is a possibility that nitrates could be one of the reasons why there's high rates of miscarriage. Usually there's more than one thing going on at once, but it's a possibility.
Dr. Humphreys, is there an assumption in the academic and health regions that the nitrate that come out in cow's pee is the same regardless of the farming system? That all cows pee a similar amount of nitrate?
This is, I've spoken to agricultural scientists who say that, well, if the nitrate's there, the nitrate is there, and yes, it's the same. Nitrate is the same no matter where it comes from.
No, I don't mean that.
But you can reduce nitrate in cow urine depending on the feed. Yes, you can.
Right, so have they made the link between the quantity of nitrate in the feed as a result of excessive use of urea fertilizer?
Yes, they have made that link. Yeah.
And so there's no effort to try and figure out how a great portion of these farmers organically, dairy, are not using nitrogen and yet are making more money.
Well, the yield can go up. I know that. Yield can go up for these cows with less nitrogen. There are ways of doing that. So depending on the feed we provide in cattle. So Australia, for example, doesn't have the same level of nitrate coming off its dairy cattle because it's using different feed to what we use.
The lack of willingness to act on what you're doing, act on the information you've got, reminds me of the Pike River situation. And I wish you all the best for you to try and avoid what happened there.
Yeah. Thank you. And I hope some of my stories illustrated that point. We have powerful forces arrayed against us, and people will undermine, they'll undermine the science and they'll provide disinformation. And we need to use every lever we can to make our politicians listen. They are committed to improving the world, as well as New Zealand, and we need to hold them to that. Things like sustainable development goals are something we have to say, look, you signed up to this. You've got to take heed of it and support us all to ensure that we keep our community healthy and our land more sustainable.
Yes, a couple of things here that worry me is that we look at these things and we just tend to accept these figures, like 10,000 litres of water for a cow to make one milk solid. Now, I'm sure when it rains, a cow isn't responsible for all that water and drinking it all off the paddock. So I know I've got a cow doing a milk solid a day, so there's no way she's drinking 10,000 litres of water. So
you need to understand that the water footprint is more than just what a cow drinks.
But if the cow wasn't there, the 10,000 litres would still be getting gobbled up somewhere. It's not just the cow that's responsible for consuming that 10,000 litres of water. As I say, we need to delve into this a little bit more. And the other thing is too that the urea and the nitrogen that's been put on the panels, there's incredible ways of mitigating the leaching of that by having different varieties of plants that will actually, by different root depths and so on, that will actually uptake that. So that nitrogen will never get into the aquifer. So, you know, we've got to be very careful about how we look at these figures.
Well, two things. Yes, I agree that you can mitigate it, but the data show that with the best, the best practices we've got, with those actions being applied, the rates are still going up. The thing about water footprints, and I have included the reference which you can look at, is a water footprint is it's the University of Trieste in Holland that does all the work on that, and they basically calculate water footprints for everything, for a pair of shoes, even a water footprint for a bottle of water. In case you know, it takes 1.6 litres of water to make 1 litre of bottled water, but if you include the packaging, it's about 7 litres of water. So it's not just what rains or what the cow drinks, it's everything that is used in the whole process to end up with that kilo of milk solids. So you can look at a water footprint for a car, for example. Chickens have a particularly high water footprint. We need to think about how much water we're using, and it's useful being mindful of it. But if you want to look at the detail, look at the reference, and it explains how they calculate the figures.
Dr. Humphrey, I'm a bit worried that your best practice is comparing 454 petrol guzzler with what this room is filled with are Teslas.
Yes, I know. I realise I was preaching to the choir here. So
I suggest you try very hard to look at best practice in this room.
yeah, we do.
Because you'll find it's way different to what is considered to be best practice.
I know that, and this is part of the problem with the Canterbury water management strategies levels. I mean, good management practice, or in terms of farming, they've set the bar very, very low. And you guys will all be much, much higher than where they've set the bar. And that's part of the problem, is that even with good management practices, they've set the bar too low. So people can easily achieve it, and it's patently not succeeding. So I agree with you, yeah, and I realise that everybody here is performing far better. But what we really want is everybody to perform as well as you guys are.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and particularly for all the data you've given us about the nitrate issues, and I think that's incredibly important. Just a couple of comments on one or two of the questions. There was some farmlet studies done at Massey University. I haven't got all the details, but they will be available, and it was comparing organic farmlets with conventional dairy systems. And the organic system certainly had lower nitrate in the feed, in the milk, and in the urine, and therefore there was a lower nitrate leaching from those organic systems, and so that information is available. In hearing your presentation, you can probably hear it in my voice sounding a little emotional. I was feeling a little defensive, which I guess is just a natural emotion, isn't it? For so much of the work that has gone on in Canterbury in the last 10 years through the Canterbury Water Management Strategy. All the farmers or most of the farmers in this district we're in, Selwyn Waihora, have now got consents to farm, and the dairy farmers, part of that is that they are required to reduce the nitrate leaching from their farms by 2022. So the reason that we're not seeing the reductions in nitrate in the groundwater that we're all hoping for and need to see for the human health and the environmental health is that none of these things are going to happen overnight. And the other thing that, one of the reasons that is given that time is because it takes farmers time to change, but the other thing is that there is no financial support put in to help those farmers change their systems overnight. Just like everyone in this room, and we've heard farmers say today, I wish I didn't have to use glyphosate, but I feel that is something that helps my system be the best system it can. So change is on the way. It's incredibly important that I think we all push for that politically. That change has to happen. But probably my final comment is we've talked a lot about human health and the importance. One of the big health problems that farmers have in New Zealand is mental health, and one of the reasons for that is that many of them feel very barraged against their farming systems, that there's a lot of blame, that they are the reason that there are these health risks, and none of them deliberately set out to cause human health harm. They're all trying to do the best they can. So I guess the challenge for all of us in this room is how do we help take the good practices we know in this room to those other farmers in a healthy way so they can improve their systems, which they want to do, while respecting them as people who are trying to do the best they can.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other point I tried to make was that to a large extent it's the farming community themselves who are most at risk of these illnesses. Sure, mental health, but also many farmers are on their own private bores that are relatively shallow and are likely to be more contaminated with nitrates. So it's the farming community themselves that are also at risk of colorectal cancer possibly, and certainly their children at risk of hemoglobinemia. So yeah, I agree, we have to, it's not about the farmers, it's about looking at the system and working on improving the system.
Well, that was a fantastic presentation. Thank you very much.
Can I have another round of applause, please?